The most dangerous people are not the ones who raise their voices. They're the ones who quietly decide that enough is enough. I used to believe that surviving was the same thing as living. Every morning, I told myself that if I made it through one more day without looking over my shoulder, I was winning. It sounded pathetic now, but fear has a way of shrinking your definition of happiness until peace feels like a luxury instead of a right. My name is Claire Bennett, and at 27 years old, I had rebuilt my life one careful step at a time. I taught second grade at a public elementary school outside Chicago, rented a small apartment with faded hardwood floors, and drove a 7-year-old Honda Civic that rattled every time I reached 60 miles an hour. None of it was impressive, but every piece of it belonged to me. That mattered more than anyone could understand. My divorce had been finalized 8 months earlier, and everyone kept telling me I should celebrate my freedom. They smiled when they said it, as if a judge's signature could erase years of anxiety. They didn't see how I still checked every parking lot before getting out of my car, or how I instinctively flinched whenever someone called my name too loudly. Some habits don't disappear just because a marriage ends. They linger quietly, hiding beneath ordinary moments until something wakes them up again. That Saturday afternoon, I drove to Lakeside Galleria to buy a birthday gift for one of my students. Her mother had recently lost her job, and I knew the little girl wouldn't be expecting much. A simple art set and a stuffed rabbit felt like enough to make one child smile. Sometimes small kindnesses are the only things keeping the world together. The mall buzzed with weekend energy. Children laughed near the indoor fountain. Teenagers crowded around the pretzel stand. Holiday decorations still hung from the skylights, even though the season had ended weeks earlier. For the first time in months, I caught myself relaxing. I even stopped for a coffee before heading toward the toy store, thinking maybe life was finally beginning to feel normal again. Then I heard someone say my name. Not loudly, not angrily, just enough to make every muscle in my body freeze before I even turned around. There are voices your heart recognizes long before your mind does. I knew that voice. I prayed I was wrong. I wasn't. Jason stood less than 20 feet away, staring at me with the same familiar smile that had once fooled everyone except the woman forced to live behind closed doors with him. In that single heartbeat, the bright mall around me suddenly felt much smaller, and without realizing it, I had just stepped into the worst day of my new life, while somewhere above the crowded atrium, a man I had never met quietly looked down from the second floor and noticed everything. Jason did not move right away. He simply watched me from across the polished tile floor as though the last 8 months had never happened. The crowd continued flowing between us, parents pushing strollers, teenagers laughing over shopping bags, a little boy begging for another cookie, yet all I could hear was my own heartbeat. I lowered my eyes, gripped the handles of the gift bags tighter, and told myself to keep walking. Do not stop. Do not answer. Do not give him a reason to believe he still belonged anywhere near my life. I had almost reached the entrance of the bookstore when I heard his footsteps behind me. Slow, unhurried, certain. That confidence used to confuse me. Now I understood it came from years of believing every room belonged to him the moment he entered it. Claire, he called again, his voice carrying just enough for nearby shoppers to glance our way before quickly looking somewhere else. I kept walking. My reflection flashed across a jewelry store window, and I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My shoulders had tensed. My breathing had shortened. The peace I had worked so hard to build was slipping away one heartbeat at a time. You are really going to ignore me? He asked after closing the distance. I stopped only because I knew continuing would make the scene worse. Slowly, I turned to face him while keeping several feet between us. There is nothing left to say, Jason. He smiled as though I had made a joke instead of setting a boundary. You disappeared without giving me a real chance to explain. I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because I had once believed those exact words. I had waited years for apologies that never became change. The divorce was final, I answered quietly. Please leave me alone. His smile faded. You always make everything sound so dramatic. The sentence landed with familiar precision. It was the same pattern, the same attempt to rewrite reality until I questioned my own memory. I refused to step back into that version of myself. I adjusted the shopping bags and turned away again. That should have been the end of it. Instead, I heard him following once more. People noticed us now. Some slowed their pace. Others pretended not to. No one wanted to become part of someone else's uncomfortable afternoon. I could feel every pair of curious eyes without meeting a single one. My pulse climbed as I searched for the nearest security desk, wondering whether I could reach it before Jason decided conversation was no longer enough. Above the central atrium, behind the glass railing of the second floor, a private business luncheon had just ended. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped away from the conference table with a cup of untouched espresso in one hand. His gaze drifted toward the noise below for only a second before settling completely on us, and although I had no idea he existed, something about the stillness in his expression suggested that he had already begun paying very close attention. My instincts told me to head toward the security office, but fear has a cruel way of making every hallway feel twice as long. Jason continued matching my pace, never raising his voice, never causing enough of a disturbance for anyone to step in, yet somehow making the air around me feel impossibly heavy. "You are embarrassing yourself," I said as calmly as I could. "Please stop following me." He shook his head with a smile that never reached his eyes. "I just want to talk." "Why are you acting like I am dangerous?" That question settled over me like cold rain because it sounded so reasonable to anyone who had never lived through the truth. A young couple walked past us carrying shopping bags. An older woman glanced in our direction before quickly looking away. Everyone saw two former spouses having what appeared to be an uncomfortable conversation. No one could hear the years hidden behind those ordinary words. I stepped toward the information desk, hoping the employees would notice my expression. Jason moved with me, quietly blocking my path without making it look obvious. "You owe me 5 minutes," he said. "I do not owe you anything." I answered more firmly than I felt. For a brief second, I saw frustration replace his practiced smile. His hand lifted, not in anger, but in an attempt to stop me from walking away again. The unexpected contact startled me enough that I froze. My breathing caught, and every memory I had spent months burying rushed back at once. "Look at me when I am talking to you," he insisted. His voice remained low, but the control inside it felt painfully familiar. I carefully removed his hand and took one step backward. "This conversation is over." Instead of listening, he moved closer again, ignoring every boundary I had tried to set. Around us, conversations began fading as nearby shoppers sensed something was wrong. A mother gently guided her children toward another corridor. Two mall employees exchanged uncertain looks. The cheerful sounds from the fountain suddenly seemed far away. I could feel panic rising inside me, not because of what was happening in front of everyone, but because I recognized the pattern. This was how it always began. Small moments, quiet pressure, then the feeling that I had somehow become trapped without anyone realizing it. Above us, the man in the charcoal suit had not looked away once. His untouched espresso rested on the glass railing beside him. 3 other men stood a respectful distance behind him, each dressed with the same understated precision. None of them spoke. None of them needed to. The tall stranger's expression remained perfectly composed as he watched Jason ignore every warning I had given. Then, almost imperceptibly, he reached for the espresso cup, set it down without taking a single sip, and folded his hands behind his back. The movement was so calm that no one below noticed it, but the 3 men behind him immediately straightened as though they had just received an order without a single word being spoken. The silence around us felt heavier than the noise of the entire mall. Jason must have sensed people watching because his expression shifted once again, replacing frustration with wounded innocence. It was a performance I knew by heart. "Claire, you are making me look like some kind of villain," he said quietly. "I only wanted a conversation." I looked directly into his eyes for the first time since he appeared. "No, Jason, you wanted control." The words surprised even me. For months, I had rehearsed that sentence in my head without ever believing I would actually say it aloud. His jaw tightened for only a second before he stepped closer, invading the little space I still had left. I instinctively leaned backward, my pulse racing, refusing to let panic speak louder than reason. "Please move," I said. "I am asking you one last time." Instead of stepping aside, he reached toward me again as though he expected me to stay exactly where he wanted. The movement was enough to make several nearby shoppers stop walking altogether. A young employee near the information desk reached for the store telephone, uncertain whether to call security. Somewhere behind me, I heard a child ask his mother why everyone had stopped. The mother answered by quietly leading him away. I wished I could leave that easily. Then something changed. It was impossible to explain at first. The atmosphere itself seemed to shift. Heads turned toward the grand staircase overlooking the central atrium. Footsteps echoed across the polished floor with calm, measured confidence. I glanced upward without thinking. The tall man from the second floor was descending the staircase, his charcoal suit perfectly tailored, his expression unreadable. 3 men followed several steps behind him, matching his pace without speaking. None of them hurried. None of them looked anxious. They moved with the quiet certainty of people who had never needed to prove who they were. Jason noticed them too, but dismissed them with barely a glance before turning back to me. "See," he said, forcing another smile. "Everyone is staring because you are overreacting." I did not answer. My attention remained fixed on the stranger walking toward us. There was something unsettling about how the crowd naturally created space for him without being asked. Conversations faded. Even the music drifting through the mall suddenly felt distant. When he finally stopped a few feet away, he did not look at Jason first. He looked at me. His green eyes studied my frightened expression with remarkable calm, as though confirming something only he understood. Then, for the first time since leaving the conference room, he spoke in a steady voice that was neither loud nor threatening. "Miss," he said, "are you asking this man to leave you alone?" My answer came before I had time to second-guess myself. Yes. It was only one word, but it carried 8 months of rebuilding, years of quiet fear, and every promise I had made to myself after signing those divorce papers. The stranger gave a single, almost imperceptible nod before shifting his attention toward Jason. There was no anger on his face, no dramatic gesture, only complete certainty. "You heard her," he said evenly. "Leave." Jason let out a short laugh and folded his arms. "This is between my ex-wife and me. Mind your own business." The stranger remained perfectly still. She made her position clear. Jason glanced at the 3 men standing several feet behind him and smirked. "What is this supposed to be? Your security team?" None of the 4 men reacted. Their composure unsettled me more than raised voices ever could. It was as though they had already seen every possible outcome and were waiting for only one person to decide which path would unfold. Around us, more people slowed to watch. A pair of mall security officers appeared at the far end of the corridor, speaking quietly into their radios while carefully assessing the situation. I noticed the stranger acknowledge them with the slightest glance before returning his attention to Jason. "This is your last opportunity to walk away on your own," he said. His tone never changed. Calm, controlled, unshakable. Jason stepped closer, trying to reclaim the confidence that had begun slipping away. "You think you scare me because you wear an expensive suit?" The stranger did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket. My heart skipped, but all he removed was a simple leather card holder. He opened it briefly toward the approaching security officers. Their expressions changed almost instantly. One of them stopped speaking into his radio. The other straightened his posture with unmistakable respect before quietly guiding curious shoppers farther back. I could not see the identification inside the holder, but whatever it was, it transformed the atmosphere in seconds. Jason noticed it too. His smile weakened ever so slightly. "Who exactly are you?" he asked. The stranger slipped the holder back into his pocket without replying. He seemed completely uninterested in introducing himself. One of the men standing behind him leaned forward just enough to speak in a voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Romano." It was not an introduction meant for us. It was simply a confirmation that everything was ready if needed. Jason's eyes flickered toward the speaker, then back to the man standing in front of me. For the first time since he had cornered me, uncertainty crossed his face. I looked at the stranger again, finally hearing the name that seemed to change the air itself. Adrian Romano neither confirmed nor denied it. He simply looked at Jason with quiet patience, as though waiting to see whether the next decision would be made wisely. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt long enough for everyone in the atrium to sense that something invisible had shifted. Jason looked from Adrian Romano to the 3 impeccably dressed men behind him, searching for an explanation that would restore the confidence he had carried only moments earlier. Instead, he found nothing except calm faces and unwavering patience. "Romano," he repeated under his breath, as though testing whether the name belonged to someone he had heard before. Then the color drained ever so slightly from his face. Recognition arrived quietly, and with it came hesitation. I noticed it because I had spent years learning to recognize every tiny change in his expression. For the first time since our paths crossed that afternoon, he no longer looked completely certain of himself. Adrian remained exactly where he was, his posture relaxed, his hands resting naturally at his sides. He did not appear interested in proving anything. Somehow that made him even more intimidating. Real confidence, I realized, never needed an audience. Jason forced a laugh that sounded thinner than before. I think this is all one big misunderstanding, he said. Claire and I have history. Couples argue. That is all. Adrian's eyes never left him. Former couples, he corrected quietly. And she has already asked you to leave. Jason glanced toward me, expecting me to soften the situation the way I always had in the past. Instead, I met his eyes without looking away. He is right, I said. Please go. Those 3 words seemed to settle something inside me. I was no longer asking for permission to exist peacefully. I was simply stating what I deserved. Jason opened his mouth, closed it again, then looked around the growing crowd. 2 mall security officers now stood nearby, no longer uncertain about where they belonged. Their attention was fixed entirely on Jason. Even the curious shoppers who had gathered moments earlier had become strangely quiet, as though everyone understood they were witnessing a turning point without fully understanding why. Adrian finally spoke again. No one should have to repeat a boundary more than once. His voice remained measured, almost gentle, yet every word carried unmistakable weight. Respect it. Jason swallowed hard. I was already leaving. He tried to sound irritated rather than intimidated, but the difference was obvious. He took one slow step backward, then another. Before turning away completely, he looked at me one final time, but whatever response he expected never came. I simply stood there breathing more steadily than I had in months. As Jason disappeared into the crowd, the tension that had wrapped itself around my chest began to loosen. I looked back at Adrian, intending to thank the stranger who had stepped into the worst moment of my day. Before I could speak, one of his associates approached quietly and whispered something into his ear. Adrian listened without changing expression, then looked directly at me again, as though deciding whether walking away now would truly leave me safe. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The noise of the mall gradually returned, conversations replacing whispers, footsteps filling the silence that had surrounded us only moments earlier. It felt strange how quickly ordinary life resumed after your own world had nearly fallen apart. I finally found my voice. Thank you, I said quietly. Adrian studied me with the same composed expression he had worn from the beginning. You do not owe me thanks. I managed a faint smile that disappeared almost immediately. Most people kept walking. His eyes briefly swept across the atrium before returning to mine. Most people convinced themselves that someone else will help. There was no judgment in his voice, only observation. Somehow that made the truth even heavier. One of the security officers approached, asking whether I wished to file an incident report. I nodded, answered a few simple questions, and confirmed that Jason had left the building. The officer assured me they would preserve the security footage if I needed it later. Hearing those words brought an unexpected sense of relief. For years I had lived with memories that only I could prove existed. Now there was a record, something real. When the officer walked away, Adrian remained beside me without crowding my space. He respected the distance I needed without being told. It was such a small gesture, yet I noticed it immediately. Do you have someone waiting for you? He asked. No. Then allow one of my drivers to escort you home. I blinked in surprise. That is not necessary. He did not argue. Perhaps not. But it is available. I shook my head gently. I appreciate the offer, but I have spent too long learning how to stand on my own again. If I leave today depending on someone else, I will lose something I worked very hard to rebuild. For the first time, the corner of Adrian's mouth lifted into the faintest smile. It was not amusement. It looked more like respect. That answer tells me more about your character than anything else could. I felt my face grow warm, uncomfortable with compliments from a complete stranger. I am just trying to move forward. So I can see. He reached into his jacket and removed a simple white business card with nothing printed on the front except his name and a phone number. No company logo, no title, nothing that explained who he really was. He offered it to me without stepping closer. Keep this. I hesitated before accepting it. I hope I never need it. His expression remained calm. So do I. He turned to leave, his 3 associates falling into step behind him with quiet precision. After only a few steps, he paused without looking back. "Miss Bennett." I looked up. "No one who truly respects you will ever ask you to be afraid of them." Then he continued walking toward the exit, leaving me standing beneath the afternoon light with a simple white card in my hand, completely unaware that before the day was over, I would discover Jason had no intention of accepting goodbye as his final answer. I tried to convince myself the day was finally over. The incident report was finished. The birthday gift still sat safely inside its paper bag. Jason had walked away. Adrian Romano had disappeared with the same quiet confidence he had arrived with. As I stepped into the parking garage, I repeated those facts like they were enough to calm my thoughts. Concrete walls echoed with distant engines and the occasional chirp of a car unlocking somewhere across the structure. My Honda Civic waited exactly where I had parked it earlier that afternoon. Ordinary. Familiar. Safe. I unlocked the driver's door, placed the shopping bags on the passenger seat, and paused with Adrian's white business card still resting in my hand. I stared at it for a moment before slipping it into my wallet. I almost laughed at myself. What were the chances I would ever need to call someone like him again? I started the engine and pulled slowly toward the exit. Halfway down the ramp, I noticed a dark sedan several car lengths behind me. At first I ignored it. Parking garages always force drivers into the same path. But after I exited onto the main road, the sedan remained behind me through 2 traffic lights and 3 turns. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Do not panic, I told myself. Maybe they were simply heading the same direction. I changed lanes. The sedan changed lanes. I turned onto a quieter residential street that added nearly 10 minutes to my drive home. The sedan followed again. My pulse quickened, but I refused to jump to conclusions. Fear had lied to me before. I would not let it control every decision. Then my phone vibrated through the Bluetooth system. An unknown number. I almost ignored it before instinct told me otherwise. "Hello." I answered. Silence greeted me for several seconds. Then Jason's voice came through the speakers, calm enough to make my stomach sink. "You really think one stranger can protect you forever?" My hands tightened on the wheel. "Do not call me again. You embarrassed me today, Claire. That was a mistake." I ended the call immediately, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Seconds later, another notification appeared on my dashboard screen. One new text message. I refused to open it. Instead, I drove directly toward the nearest police substation I could remember seeing during my daily commute. The dark sedan continued following at a distance until the station came into view. Only then did it slow, turn at the next intersection, and disappear into traffic. I sat in my car outside the police building for several minutes, breathing slowly, trying to convince myself I had done the right thing. As I reached into my purse for my wallet, Adrian's plain white business card slipped onto my lap. At almost the same moment, my phone rang again. This time the caller identification displayed a name instead of an unknown number. Adrian Romano. My hand hovered above the answer button for what felt like forever. I had known Adrian Romano for less than an hour, yet somehow his name appearing on my dashboard felt less alarming than the silence that had followed Jason's call. I accepted the call and pressed the phone against the steering wheel with both hands still trembling slightly. "How did you get this number?" I asked. "The incident at the mall raised concerns," Adrian replied in the same calm voice I remembered. "One of my associates noticed a vehicle following you after you left." I looked into the rearview mirror. The street behind me was empty now, but the memory of the dark sedan still lingered. "You were watching?" I asked quietly. "I was making sure you reached somewhere safe." There was no possessiveness in his words. No expectation that I owed him gratitude. Only quiet certainty. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. "Jason called me," I admitted. "He followed me until I reached the police station." Adrian remained silent for several seconds before speaking again. "You made the correct decision. Keep every message. Do not delete anything. Documentation is stronger than fear." Those words settled into my mind differently than every piece of advice I had received before. He was not promising revenge. He was not offering dramatic solutions. He was reminding me that the truth mattered. "I do not want my life to become someone else's problem," I whispered. "Your safety is not a burden," Adrian answered. "It is a responsibility that begins with the people who choose to care." I looked through the windshield as the evening sun reflected across the windows of the police building. For the first time in years, I realized protection did not always arrive with loud speeches or impossible promises. Sometimes it arrived with respect for your choices and the patience to let you make them yourself. "Thank you," I said again, and this time the words carried a different meaning. Adrian did not respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost thoughtful. "Miss Bennett, there will come a day when you no longer measure every room by its exits. When that day arrives, I hope you remember it was never fear that defined you. It was the decision to keep moving despite it." The call ended a few moments later. I sat in my car watching families walk past the police station, children laughing without looking over their shoulders, couples carrying groceries, ordinary people living ordinary lives. I realized that was all I had ever wanted. Months later, every report had been filed, every legal boundary had been reinforced, and Jason was no longer part of my daily life. Adrian and I would meet again under very different circumstances, but that is another story. What stayed with me most was not his influence or his reputation. It was one simple lesson that changed my life forever. The strongest person in the room is not the one everyone fears. It is the one who makes frightened people feel safe.